Hey YouTube, what's up? Mike the Manic Geek here. I'm gonna go ahead and apologize ahead of time if you guys hear any sort of excessive sniffling from me. My allergies are kind of acting up right now and all the Claritin in the world isn't helping presently. Hashtag oak trees hate my life. But today we are going to be taking a look at the MSI A88Xi AC V2 motherboard. This is their ITX offering for AMD's FM2 Plus socket, which means this is going to be good for your APU users out there. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick rundown of the motherboard for you, run you through the Uefi Bios, and let you know what my experience was like using this as my home theater computer platform. So we'll start off with the look of the motherboard. MSI was gracious enough to make the PCB on this all black. The heatsink is all black. Any of the lettering on it is white. Very attractive looking motherboard for what it is. So if you're using this in a case environment where you're going to be showing off the hardware on the inside of your computer, it's going to show really cleanly. Now, as far as internal headers are concerned, we do have USB 2.0 and 3.0 header. We have 4 SATA 3 connections, and we have a mini PCIe slot for mounting a wireless controller, which this motherboard does come with, and which you can swap out for your own wireless adapter should you desire. This does also feature Bluetooth functionality on it, so if you have any Bluetooth peripherals, they will be able to wirelessly interlink with this motherboard. Now, as far as fan headers are concerned, this does have 2 of them. One is labeled specifically for a chassis fan and one is labeled specifically for CPU fan. They are both pulse width modulated. That's nice to see. I would have liked to see at least one more fan header for the motherboard, but it's not exactly a deal breaker. And frankly, for a system like this, 2 fans being controlled by the motherboard should be plenty for your needs. Now, this does also have HD audio header and 4-pin EPS 12-volt header. But the positioning for them is a little awkward. They're sort of sandwiched between the rear I/O, the motherboard, and the PCIe slot that this is equipped with. It's not terrible, but it means that you're going to be faced with some really interesting cable routing decisions with this motherboard. So just bear that in mind. Again, it's not a deal breaker. If you really need to, you can route a 4-pin EPS 12-volt connector in between the gap that's at the front of a PCI Express card, typically. I've done that before with this motherboard and it works just fine. Your rear I/O is pretty standard fare. Comes with your legacy PS2 port, your SPDIF out. You also have your VGA and DVI connector. You have 4 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports. You have 3 audio jacks, and you also have your Ethernet, and you have 2 wireless antenna adapters. And this motherboard does come with those adapters. They are they're fairly standard. They're nothing that you can remote mount somewhere else with your system, but they do get the job done, and the range is pretty exceptional on it. Normally, I'm not a fan of built-in wireless solutions on motherboards, but MSI did a really good job with this one. Now, as far as the power that's being fed to your processor, iGPU, you have a 5-phase VRM located right next to the CPU socket. Not entirely certain how this is divvied up between iGPU and CPU cores. I attempted to reach out to MSI to find out, but I didn't really get a response back. So for right now, we'll leave it that this is a 5-phase VRM that this motherboard is equipped with. Now, you do also get your 2 obligatory DDR3 spots, which are capable of housing up to 2400 megahertz memory. That's a really nice feature to have available, especially given that the iGPU on these APUs tends to respond really well to higher frequency memory as opposed to straight core overclocking, which I'll get to later on in this video. But for right now, let's go ahead and take a look at the Uefi Bios on this thing and see what this board has to offer in that department. Now, once we get inside the Uefi Bios on this motherboard, we see a fairly typical MSI UEFI layout. It's nothing that's any different from any motherboard that they already have out there. And that's good to see because it's a very intuitive BIOS and it's very easy to navigate, read, and understand. But one of the problems that I had with it, and it's not necessarily a problem, just so much as I don't really know how to word it, but there's an Overclock tab, right? And it gives you the option to change your APU, CPU core multiplier. It lets you change your base clock. It lets you alter your iGPU frequency, and it lets you change your memory timings and clock speeds, as well as memory voltage. But there's no voltage control for anything else on this motherboard at all. Even going through and disabling features like AMD Cool and Quiet and Turbo Core technology don't give you the opportunity to mess with things like load line calibration, specific CPU core voltage, modifying the voltage for your iGPU. The options simply aren't there. Now that being said, I was able to go through and overclock my memory, which is ADATA's XPG V2 modules, to my typical 2133 megahertz at 1.65 volts with absolutely no problems on this motherboard. Everything ran incredibly smoothly to that end. Now the rest of the BIOS is pretty typical fare. You've got some overclock profiles that you can save should you be able to manage that at all with this motherboard. And then you've got, you know, all the rest of the features and functionality that you would expect from a modern UEFI BIOS. Now, this does also come equipped with Overclock Genie, or OC Genie as it's referred to by MSI. The problem with this functionality, however, it only works for 65 watt TDP APUs. So the A107-7850K that I'm using on this system is not capable of being auto-tuned. Not really the biggest deal in the world since most auto-tune functionality doesn't really work all that well, but I'll get into that now. Now, as far as using this platform is concerned, it was an interesting ride. I went ahead and tested everything inside this A88Xi case that I have. In case you guys were wondering, this is the A88Xi. I outfitted this with a Cooler Master Sidon 120M all-in-one liquid CPU cooler that's equipped with a Fractal Design Venturi HP12 fan in pull on the other side here. I also, as I previously mentioned, have the ADATA XPG V2 memory modules and an AMD A107-7850K APU equipped here. Now, overclocking the graphics was pretty much a no-go on this. I found that I was able to move the frequency forward up to about 100 megahertz. But I really didn't notice any perceivable improvement in gaming FPS. And what I actually did notice is that because I'm incapable of adjusting the voltages on the iGPU here, I was getting desktop instability when I would move around Windows, especially in the Windows 10 environment, which is the OS that this particular machine is equipped with currently. So I pretty much left the iGPU alone, and admittedly I found better results, as is typical for this particular setup, by overclocking the memory. Setting memory to 2133 megahertz on this resulted in some really playable, enjoyable frame rates on games like League of Legends, Team Fortress 2. I even successfully did some Borderlands 2 gaming on this at low settings for 1080p, with the only real frame dips that I was getting occurring when there were a lot of particle effects on the screen and bloom effects like the acid and fire proc that you can get on certain elemental guns. Now, as far as CPU core overclocking is concerned, that was an interesting journey. I wasn't able to do it through the BIOS, but I wanted to see what the VRMs on this motherboard were capable of handling. So I went ahead and used AMD's Catalyst Control Center along with AMD Overdrive to do some auto-tune clocking and some tweaking from there. What? You used auto-tune? But Mike, you just said that I know what I just said. Hear me out here. The BIOS on this motherboard does not really give you the sort of flexibility that you would need to overclock with this system. But the nice thing about an AMD ecosystem is that Catalyst Control Center gives you some of that functionality back where the motherboard might otherwise be lacking in it. So the steps that I took here, I used Catalyst Control Center to allow auto-tuning and overriding of base CPU functions, and let it go through and auto-tune and figure out what frequencies did and didn't work for this CPU. Auto-tune was able to squeak out 4.4 gigahertz frequencies, but what I noticed was that under a stress test, any of their preset frequencies failed after approximately 15 to 30 minutes. AMD, I might seriously suggest revisiting the Catalyst Control Suite and reevaluating how it auto-tunes CPU clock speeds. But that being said, after I ran the auto-tune, I moved back to 4.3 gigahertz and started increasing the CPU VID within AMD Overdrive. This resulted in stability with 4.3 gigahertz with cool and quiet and turbo core functionality enabled. Now, why would I do that? Well, in this case, it's a home theater computer motherboard. Plain and simple. That's how I'm perceiving this. It's designed for the best home theater experience that you can possibly get out of an AMD APU. And in large part, it successfully does that. So why would I want my home theater computer drinking more power than it absolutely needs to when I can keep the clock speeds and voltages dynamic and only have the boost clock kick in at 4.3 gigahertz when it's absolutely needed? Now, that being said, during my stress testing on this, I did find that it took a while for those clock speeds to start modulating a lot, like they tend to do once you hit a certain TDP limit on the processor. But it really didn't impact any of my day-to-day usage. Video streaming works flawlessly with this motherboard. As I previously said, Wi-Fi reception is really good. And I was able to do some really strong gaming with it, and even the audio codec on this is pretty strong. I was able to really enjoy the listening experience that I had with my Logitech 2.1 speakers that I have in my living room. So, what's really left to say about this, guys? Well, it's an awesome motherboard. It's got a couple of little quirks with it, but what motherboard doesn't? It's got all the connectivity that you should need for your APU buildup. It's got the capacity to tune extremely well, with the exception of the iGPU, of course. Fairly robust connectivity for what you would be using the system for, and I would dare go so far as to say that even if you were to equip this with something like a GTX 960 as a discrete option, or even if you wanted to run dual graphics on this, you could probably get a really strong casual gaming rig out of this in a really small form factor. Really, there's not much to not like here. MSI did a really good job on this motherboard. It's a strong, stable platform, and if you're looking for an ITX FM2 Plus socket motherboard, there aren't many options out there, guys, but frankly, this is the only one that you need to pick, and this definitely gets 2 solid thumbs up from Mike the Manic Geek. So, with that being said, do that thumbs up, thumbs down, share, subscribe thing like you do, how you do. Also, be sure to follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter at @TheManicGeek, and I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/ManicGeekisme. Also, my channel has now gotten big enough that I have a support me button. Yay! So if you guys want to become a bigger part of this Manic mob that I'm forming up, go ahead and hit up the homepage for my YouTube channel and hit that fund me/donate button. Every little bit that you guys send over helps. It's not a requirement. I'm going to still make videos either way, but the little bit extra would absolutely help me ramp up production quality and honestly maybe even give me a little more time to put out more videos for you guys. Anyway, until next time, this is Mike the Manic Geek. Take it easy, YouTube.